CV rundown, which is nice. Briefly, just who we are and why I'm here. I work for the Centre for Cities, which is a think tank based in London, and we look at how to understand and improve the economies of cities, essentially. So looking at economic growth and what affects that and how it's been looking. And today, essentially, politics tends to look at things in the short term, and we've seen that perhaps recently, and over lots of different cycles. And I think today, to really understand what's happening in Hull and to sort of give you an overview of the kind of economy, the challenges, the opportunities, and sort of where we are, I think we need to look longer term than that. So hopefully today we'll start to scratch the surface of a little bit of that. I think first up, we always have to slightly justify why we're the Centre for Cities and why cities matter. Well, firstly, they matter because of the scale. So about half population live in them, but also that's where most of the sort of challenges and opportunities of the economy are. So if we're thinking about the welfare bill, which is obviously something that has been hit pretty hard in the last couple of years and is probably going to be targeted for a little bit longer, 2/3 of that is spent in cities. If we talk about where the high-skilled jobs, where the future of the economy is, where the sort of economic growth that we've seen over the last 20 years has been coming from, 2/3 of them are in cities. Sorry, 3/4. I'm underestimating it. So essentially, cities are where not only the challenges are, but the momentum for the economic growth are. And we're going to go into that for a little bit more depth. So this is the first of many maps, which is jobs growth over the last 10 years. And so we know that cities have been generating jobs at a faster rate than anywhere else, but they have different growth rates in different cities. So you can see Hull not doing so well over the last 10 years, and that's sort of broadly picked up across the sort of the north of England compared to the south of England. This thing that we keep on hearing about, which is that north-south divide. In the last 10 years, you can really see that as far as jobs growth is concerned, much more towards the sort of greater southeast. It's not as simple as that, though. There's obviously stories within it. There's places like Hastings and things like that in the south which are not doing so well. There's also places like around that Mansfield, Nottingham, Derby area which are actually doing quite well over the last 10 years. So there's more to it than just that. But the north-south divide is still there, and it is something that politically is difficult, and that's the sort of rationale behind the government's Northern Powerhouse agenda. And that's the sort of political imperative. I'm sure you've all heard of the term, and I'm sure there's different takes about exactly what it means. But essentially, this is what the jobs of the Northern Powerhouse look like. And one thing that we sort of have to espouse quite often is the fact that the Northern Powerhouse can be a useful term, and if it leads to the kind of making the original thought behind it, which is making the most of the cities of the north, then it can wield real genuine results, and something that we think is really important. But it's a misnomer, and actually it's quite unhelpful to think of it how it's starting to become thought of, which is as a single entity in itself, and how we can harness it as making it into a single city. As you can see, this is where jobs are. So the higher the peak, the more jobs are there. And as you can see, it's the cities which matter. So Hull's there, and the city centre, again, you can see that sort of spikes up like much higher than anywhere else around here. Again, with Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, and Newcastle as well. So essentially what we're seeing is a series of cities, and we've done some research on this over the last couple of months, and found that actually it really isn't a single economy. These places, although they do trade with each other and people do commute, it's not a single entity where people sort of operate as a single economy. And that's quite an important thing when it comes to policy interventions, which we will sort of talk about in a bit later. So how about Hull? What about the details of Hull? Well, this is some of what we know about the data behind Hull. We're going to explain it in a lot more detail. But some of the challenges are quite stark. So productivity, that's GVA per worker, that's how much is sort of generated by each worker, is not particularly high, so 59th out of 62 cities, that's what the brackets are. And that's largely because of the industrial breakdown that we see here. So the knowledge-intensive business services are quite low, so 60th cities out of 62 cities. What that means is the jobs which are kind of really expecting to generate growth in, first of all, jobs, but second of all, GVA, so productivity, the amount of money created. These are the kind of businesses which are doing that, and there's not a lot of them here compared to elsewhere. There has been growth in these sectors, and that's really important, and that's something that I think we can be encouraged by in Hull, and something that I think actually has been one of the success stories. But we can see it hasn't got as many of those jobs as elsewhere, and that's probably something that we want to continue to target and to think of new ways to support those kind of businesses. They do exist and they are growing, but there's just less of them than there are elsewhere. Similarly, manufacturing is relatively high, which again tends to be the kind of lower skilled, lower paid manufacturing. And they're also the kind of jobs which are actually quite sensitive to all these stories that we hear about the robots taking over. Actually, a lot of stuff's already happened and it is happening. And we're going to get into that when we look at the history of Hull's economic structure. But those are sort of specific jobs which essentially are quite sensitive to change. And so that's partly why we see the low productivity. And again, why is that industrial structure there? Well, partly it's explained by the fact that the skills aren't quite as high as we'd like them. So, again, talking to you guys, you know the high-level qualifications well. Well, actually, only about a quarter of people in Hull have degrees, degree level, which is high-level qualification, and actually 14%, which is relatively high, have no formal qualifications. By that we mean 5 A-star to C GCSEs. And so that's a challenge, and you see that reflected in things like claimant count and relatively low employment rate. And really to think about what's happened, why is this the case? We need to think much broader than just those board statistics or just the sort of political timescales that we've been looking at. If we take it back 100 years and look at 100 years of change, this is what we've done here. This is jobs change over 100 years, and as you can see, across the country it's been a very mixed picture. There's been some huge job creators and some places which haven't seen the same amount of jobs growth. So the red dots are the ones which have lost jobs. Hull's one of them. Hasn't lost a huge amount, so it's not it's not like a big circle, but it has lost some. And broadly, again, you see that north-south divide. We can talk a little bit about why that is in a minute. But there's some interesting stories in here, and it's not just a kind of which place has done well. It's not quite that simple. So if you think about the fact that here, so Doncaster's got quite significant jobs growth, whereas Manchester hasn't. Would we say that meant that over the last 100 years, Doncaster's has made Doncaster into a great place compared to Manchester to capitalise on future growth? Probably not. We're probably going to see more growth in Manchester than we do in Doncaster. So it's not a catch-all. It doesn't tell us everything, but it does start to paint a picture. That's 100 years of change. And so what's driven that change? Well, we've got a neat little infographic that my colleagues have made. And essentially, it's been a century of change. So, when cities back in the day, 100 years ago, it's all about being close to raw materials and close to ports and things like that. We know well being here. But, close to those physical assets, which are really important. And being able to sort of be close to, as you see, rivers, ports, transport, fuel sources, and large numbers of workers. So it's all about getting a quantity of people there, which is really important. Now, much more, cities that thrive tend to be the ones which have got access to knowledge, and that's a bit of a sort of sounds like an intangible thing, but actually what we're talking about is well, we can look at it by things like graduates, but actually it's also the kind of people who have been working in successful places and in those knowledge-intensive business services that we mentioned earlier. Those kind of jobs tend to be in the cities which are growing. And it seems to be a sort of self-fulfilling kind of thing, that essentially when you get more of these businesses, you not only improve the lot of the people who are employed by them, but you also get more of the sort of knock-on stuff. So you get other services, lower value services which are there. So things like, the sort of prosaic one is the people who clean an office, but obviously there's much more to it than that. There's things like restaurants, retail, all those kind of businesses tend to do well when knowledge-intensive business services do well. So we'll get onto that in a second, but essentially knowledge has been more and more important over the last 100 years in the same way that sort of raw materials were back in the day. So yeah, we've got a little bit here of the pathway of where places have been. It explains kind of what I just talked about, but I can forward around the slides. Essentially, places which have locked themselves into low knowledge pathways are places which have replicated their same economy. So they had coal mines and now they've got call centres. Whereas places which have reinvented themselves or had a high level of knowledge originally have tended to generate more of that, and you get these positive feedback loops in those kind of places. So the key is to get places away from the low knowledge pathway and towards high knowledge pathway. So that's away from the kind of places which are dominated by single employers and dominated by low value jobs, which are routinized jobs, and towards the kind of the jobs that we're going to see being generated in the future. So yeah, essentially it's about that proximity to knowledge and getting there. So this is kind of where cities have been on those kind of metrics. So over here we've got replicators, and over there reinventors. Hull has so far seen not a huge amount of jobs in those knowledge-intensive jobs, and therefore it's been much more of a replicator. Much more, it's this one here with the purple. And the jobs growth hasn't been there, and where there's jobs that are here have been much more the sort of same types of routinized labour jobs. And we've got some more detail of that coming up. But essentially, if you want to adapt to the sort of 21st century, we want to get more into that reinventing side. What's the implication of that? Well, the performance today. So all these kind of sort of intangible things actually changed where these cities lie today. So this is the average wages of these places in different those different quadrants. So we had Hull in B, which unfortunately is the lower of the workplace wages. Less graduates in the workforce, quite a lot of low qualifications, and things like low business starts as well, and GVA. And that's so essentially how do we get towards that other side? Well, this is kind of why. So this is the industrial structure of Hull over the last 100 years. It's brand new. First time I've taken it out of the office, which is very exciting for geeks like me. So what we see here is 150 years of the types of jobs. So at the bottom, at the very bottom, we've got agriculture, and as you can see, it's never been a particularly considerable employer, and so we can ignore that. Let's look at the next one, which is the red one. That's mining and manufacturing. As you can see, as Hull's economy boomed from 1880 to 1910, that increased massively. And that's, if we think about, the kinds of jobs that are being created there, lots of manufacturing jobs, that's the sort of first wave of people moving to cities. And Hull, that's sort of when Hull's economy first boomed. The other thing that it also did well, or at least it had a lot of jobs in, is low-value services. So that's a huge amount of jobs, and that's the green one, were created in low-value services. And that's pretty much where the jobs have been coming from. You've got a tiny bit of public up there, tiny bit of other, which is anything else, and then a tiny bit of high-value services, which across the country, as we'll see in a second, wasn't a significant part of the economy back then. And as you can see, that's been relatively consistent up until the 50s. And in 1970, you see that manufacturing, or mining and manufacturing, drops a little bit before dropping considerably down to 1990. In 1970, you can see that public services start to come in. So this is all sort of education, healthcare, stuff like that. And you can see it's become increasingly important to Hull's economy, as has low-value services as well. So they've sort of consistently been there as a large part of the economy of Hull. And that's not the same for everywhere in the UK, so we'll get into it in a second. But the things we should be aware of is the fact that it's not a huge amount of high-value services increased from 1990 to 2011, but there is a massive increase in low-value services and a significant drop in manufacturing, not as large as other places though. So this is the same data, but in percentages. So sorry, bear with me. I know this is lots of lines and could be boring, but I'm going to tell you why it's not boring. And that's because here, again, we see that manufacturing in Hull higher than in England, low-value services higher than England, and high-value services is smaller, and that's why we should be concerned about the industrial structure of Hull, is because those are the kind of businesses that we see as driving the future of the economy of the UK. Those are the kind of places, those are the kind of jobs which, as a country, we tend to do well at. We've got a comparative advantage. We're going to get onto it into a second, why we're good at those kind of things, but those are the kind of businesses that are really important, and there doesn't seem to be that same level of employment in Hull than there is in other places. Having said that, there is a significant amount of high value services, and it's getting more significant. So that we can be positive about, and that's a really positive story. And that's not, that's still a significant part of the economy, and it's growing. So that's something that we should be encouraging. We should be looking at how we've done that in Hull and how we might be able to do more of that. So those are the kind of, that's the kind of story of where we've been and where we're going there. And I think that sort of the key is why does this composition of this matter? Well, it matters for a whole bunch of stuff. So this is a change in. There's a whole load of stuff in this graph. Again, I'm not going to bore you too much because it is very exciting for nerds, but probably not for normal people. And I'm going to assume most of you are normal. So the purple ones are places which have had high income tax decreases income tax decrease. And compared to sort of places which have had high income tax increases over there. So same sort of places, but these places have got more jobs, earning more, and this has had fewer jobs, earning less. Hull's here, so it's not lost as many jobs as some of these places, but it's not got the earning potential of some of them. So it's job creation-wise, we're not looking too bad. The sort of jobs miracle that we've seen as a country over the last 10 years, 5 years, seems to sort of carry out in Hull, but it's not necessarily the right type of jobs. So it's not those high-value jobs. So we're not getting the pay that we'd really be wanting in the area. And that matters not just for those people, but again, because if you get people who are paid more, it generates more demand in the area. It not only does it sort of mean that those people go out and buy more, that sort of I was about to say trickle down, but how to say those kind of things. But it's not just because because people who are paid more buy more, but it's also because those kind of businesses generate more demand for business services, and those again are the kind of higher paid jobs. So there's a sort of feedback loop within businesses, which is really important, and seems to be the future sort of growth, where future growth is going to be coming from. And the reason why I keep on saying that is because of this kind of thing. So this is some work we did with OECD and UK SES, which are no longer with us, but Commission for Education and Skills. And this is a change in high, medium, mid-level and low-wage occupations. As you can see, basically our economy is diverging. So we've got a whole load more high-paid jobs. So this is now 2016. And we expect that to broadly continue. There's a little dip here for the recession, but essentially we're going to see that continue. We're going to see more high-paid jobs, which obviously is good. We're also going to see more low-paid jobs, which is worrying. But this is the bit that's really worrying. It's the fact that those medium-paid jobs are dropping out, and that's because of the kind of routinized jobs, blah blah blah, that we can see the economy changing from. And that's really important when we're talking about how it's going to get from where it is now to where it wants to be, because those middle level jobs are going to drop out, and that's going to hit the sort of a lot of the people in Hull essentially who are in those kind of jobs. And as we've seen, the industrial structure is such that the places are going to be sensitive to that. So that's a lot of things like those low to medium level services that we see make up a higher proportion of Hull's economy than it does England and Wales, and public service jobs, which make up a significant part of Hull's economy as well. They're both going to be subject to quite a lot of change. Austerity seems to be with us for a while now, and that's likely going to be a squeeze, and there are going to be squeezes like that on public services, and equally on lower value services as well as we become more efficient through things like globalization and technological change. And that's why there's increasing importance of new work firms. And new work is a kind of corny think tank way of saying those kind of knowledge-intensive businesses. So things like digital, things like financial, professional services, creative industry, all these kind of places. This is how much they've changed since the recession. So these are the places these are the businesses which have really been driving employment growth and definitely productivity growth since the recession. And it's all these kind of firms, yeah. So the sort of financial, digital, professional services, creative industries, they've been growing, whilst manufacturing, primary industries, other services, so those are low-value services, those other firms haven't been growing. So you've seen less employment in those places, and the employment that it is for lower paid jobs. So it's new work kind of firms that actually are going to be driving growth, and that's why we need to make sure that that bit of purple grows in Hull's economy, that sort of high value services, because these kind of firms they sort of concentrate in particular cities. They pay a huge amount to be in sort of a huge amount of digital firms in Reading, and they pay massive rents to be there because they have access to the right kind of people there. They have the right kind of like graduates that they want to hire, but also because they want to be next to their competitors. You get the learning from each other. You get those knowledge spillovers, those agglomeration benefits that economists love to talk about. But it's really clear that these kind of digital firms, for instance, I'm taking them for example, but you can talk about any of those new work firms. They tend to go to specific places, and they tend to go to specific cities, and they tend to go to specific places within those cities. And it's really at that level, it's that real micro level where you get these location choices. Google could go anywhere. We were just talking about it just now. Google could go anywhere. They are based off the internet. You can, death of distance. You could work anywhere. You could work from home, but they don't. They choose to pay incredible rents to be in the centre of London, the most expensive commercial property in the world, because of those benefits. So the more of these kind of firms that we can do, and the more we can make the most of them and concentrate them into city centres, the better we'll do. Hull doesn't have as many as we'd want. I'm not going to spend too long on that because we kind of covered it. But it's important, and I think this kind of idea of how do we get more, how do we generate economic growth, given the fact that we know these kind of things are important, how do we get there? Well, the thing is, there's a range of things, and there's no simple solution. And actually, I'm not just saying this because of our present company. Hull are actually doing a really good job at some of this stuff compared to other places which are seeing similar challenges. There's a real pro-growth attitude in the city, which isn't the case for everywhere. But we still got challenges. So there's things like skills that we really want to be focusing on. There's geography, there's infrastructure, there's the industrial structure that we talked about. And then there's things like building on the assets that we already have. That's what we can do. Be genuinely honest about what the real assets of Hull are. And I think actually as a city, we're really good at that in Hull compared to other cities. In other cities there does tend to be a bit of a delusion about wanting big, sexy new industries and pretending that we've got massive growth in those places. We're actually being honest about what the assets are and using them is a real asset of the city. Things like leadership, taking those tough decisions, deciding when to invest in one thing and not on the other is really tough, and that's really important for Hull. I'm going to briefly touch on it later as well, which is that's going to be changing with devolution, and we need to make sure that Hull's not left behind in that. Physical development's important, so buildings. It's not the be-all and end-all though. The physical structure of Hull is actually in a really good place. The city centre is desirable. We just need to make the most of getting the businesses there and making sure businesses choose to locate in the city centre. I'm aware that I'm spending far too long on everything so far because I've got lots of exciting data. But I think essentially what we're saying is skills need to be a priority. So all those kind of businesses that we've talked about that we want to have more of in Hull are completely reliant on skills. And the reason why that matters is because this is plotting working age population with degrees versus growth in productivity. Really good correlation, which means that essentially the more high-skilled people you have in a city, the better it does, the more productive it is. And it seems like an obvious point, but it's a really important point, that skills need to be the priority. We can also think about where sort of businesses go and what kind of businesses are in different places. So this is a 3D map of where jobs are in Hull, and on the left we've got nationwide. Where do these kind of firms like to be? So where do financial services firms like to be? Well, 50% of financial services jobs, or over 50% of financial services jobs, are in city centres. And a bit less than that, but still really significant for knowledge-intensive business services. So all those kind of new work things that I just talked about. And that has a real knock-on effect, because it means you get things like, you get much more restaurants, you get much more retail. It's not just, finance isn't just for bankers. These kind of places, they benefit the whole city. And so we need to be thinking about how we can make the most of the city centre of Hull. And that's actually, again, a real positive of what's been happening already. And I think the next speaker is going to sort of talk about the city of culture and what that can offer in a similar kind of way. We did some research. I'm not going to go into it in any detail, but around where do people in the city centre, what are the kind of things that they like about where they live compared to suburban residents? And apart from the cheesy graphics, it's quite important because we need to be thinking about how different parts of the city operate in different ways. And the best way we can do that is by incentivising local areas to make better choices. So at the moment, I'm just going to go around this really briefly, is that policymakers essentially in a city take the tough decisions but don't see any of the benefits. So that's what that busy kind of graphic on the left, the purple one, is showing, that they're bearing 67% of the costs but only getting 33% of the benefits. So that means that it's costing places a real significant amount of their money to sort of invest in making their area better, but they don't see any of that income tax, they don't see any of the stamp duty, they don't see any of the sort of the taxes that they generate and improve on coming back to the local area. And if you have that as a councillor, it's very hard to take tough decisions when you see no benefit and you see the cost of these decisions. So improving those kind of feedback loops, making it more like an OECD average, that's basically the sort of countries similar to us. On average, cities generate 55% of their taxes locally, so 55% of what is generated locally is retained locally. In our cities, it's 17%. We're the lowest in the OECD, so we're the most centralised country on this kind of thing. And essentially, we need more devolution to get more of this done. That's what that Northern Powerhouse agenda was about. And I could talk about loads more, but I won't. So the business rates are going that way, so I don't know how much you guys know about that, but that's going to be devolved over this structure. And that can be really important. But we also need to go a bit further than that. So we need to sort of balance out land use and talk about different types of taxes being devolved. Until we get a kind of proper, meaningful devolution of fiscal things, it's going to be really hard to get those feedback loops right. So we can start tackling some of the challenges in a kind of serious, strategic way as a city. These are a bunch of devolution deals which are going on at the moment. So this is where the places are getting mayors across all those places, so 6 of the biggest cities outside of London, obviously London's already got one, are going to start getting their mayors. So they're going to get it used to be Boris down there, which was, so I could say Boris for Hull, but now it's Sadiq. And that's Tony Lloyd in the middle, who's less high profile, but it's doing the same thing in Manchester, where they're getting a really exciting deal. And the Northern Powerhouse agenda is important. And actually getting these kind of, but the deals that are coming behind it are much more important. So getting a mayor, getting those devolution deals, being able to make more of those choices over more of those things at a local basis is super important. I know that Hull is in negotiations about that, and it's, if deals can be done, that would be fantastic for Hull. It means they can start making the tough decisions across the whole city region. And start getting real progress and capitalising on what's already there. I won't take up any more of your time. I know I already had spent too long. But if you've got any questions, then I'm not sure if we're doing them now or afterwards. Or
I'm conscious you have to get in the train.
Yeah, well, okay.
So now would be good.
Fantastic. Well, if we've got time for questions, that'd be great. So if anyone's... Yeah, hi.
Do you consider that the size of the city of Hull is a disadvantage, bearing in mind that we have been trying for many, what I would say, centuries now to increase our boundaries?
Without getting, I know that's an ongoing debate about
for centuries.
Where to. I think, yeah, exactly. And we were talking about East Riding just now. I think it is important, and actually, the best geographies are the ones that reflect proper economies for these kind of things. So I think, if there is a devolution deal, getting it done with East Riding, if that is the way the economy works properly, so that by that I mean people are coming in from East Riding to work in Hull, and those kind of relationships, then it does start to make sense, because then you can start to make decisions on, say, things like housing and transport. They matter at an economy level rather than just a whole city council level. So I do think it's important. Exactly where to draw the boundary, I'm not going to get into that. But yeah, no,